Today we're going to talk about a critical moment that changed the fate of humanity, World War II. British Prime Minister Churchill once described World War II as, "This is an unnecessary war." But looking back at human history, which war was necessary? As the physicist Einstein said, "I do not know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." World War II was the largest scale and most devastating war in human history. It changed the balance of power in the world, reshaped the post-war order, and affected the fate of generations. In this global war, which battles played a decisive role, and how did they influence the post-war world? Let's follow the lens of grand historical perspective to review those thrilling battles in World War II and reveal their close connection with our lives today. Are you ready? Let's start this historical journey through time and space. Okay, let me compose this part of the video script for you. In 1942, Hitler launched Case Blue, attempting to capture the southern oil fields of the Soviet Union. The main target of the German army was the industrial city on the banks of the Volga River, Stalingrad. At this time, although the German army had penetrated deep into Soviet territory, it still maintained a powerful combat capability. In contrast, the Soviet army suffered heavy losses in the early stages of the war, facing the German army's heavily armed elite troops, and the situation was very severe. But the Soviet soldiers in Stalingrad did not flinch. They carried forward the heroic spirit of fighting to the last man, bullet and breath, persisting in the ruins. The famous Battle of Snipers took place here, and Soviet snipers once set glorious records of their achievements. In November 1942, the Soviet army launched Operation Uranus, implementing a double encirclement of the German army, which was exhausted from defense. After months of desperate fighting, the Soviet army finally crushed the German army group, and the Battle of Stalingrad was victorious. This marked a major turning point on the European battlefield of World War II. From then on, the German army no longer had the strength to launch large-scale offensives and could only retreat step by step on Soviet soil. This victory also greatly boosted the morale of anti-fascist forces around the world. As the telegram from the Soviet Supreme Command stated, "Today, the fate of the Axis powers has been nailed to the city walls of Stalingrad." In June 1944, the Allies launched a great operation on the western front of Europe, the Normandy landings. This was the largest amphibious landing operation in the history of human warfare. For this operation, the Allies made meticulous preparations. Through intelligence warfare and deception, they successfully misled the German army, causing its main force to be deployed in the Calais region. At the same time, General Eisenhower carefully selected Normandy as the landing site, which was a weak point in the German defense. On the morning of June 6, 1944, the Allies began to cross the Normandy beaches. The landing battle was unprecedentedly difficult. On Omaha Beach alone, American casualties exceeded 2,000, but the Allied soldiers, undaunted by the sacrifices, finally captured the German positions and established a solid beachhead in France. The success of the Normandy landings completely changed the situation on the European battlefield. The Allies continuously transported troops and advanced into German-occupied territory. It tied down the main German forces in Europe, coordinating with the Soviet offensive on the Eastern Front, forming a pincer attack against Germany. This world-renowned landing signified the inevitable defeat of Nazi Germany. As Churchill said, "The road is long and hard, but victory must belong to justice and freedom." The Normandy landings laid a solid foundation for completely defeating the Nazis and liberating Europe. In June 1942, a decisive naval battle was brewing in the Pacific Theater. The Japanese Navy had been riding high after the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, and their offensive was in full swing. They planned to capture Midway Island and then directly attack Hawaii. The U.S. forces defending the island were far inferior to their opponents. At that time, the Japanese Navy had 10 aircraft carriers in the Pacific, while the U.S. had only 3. Faced with a vastly superior opponent, could the U.S. forces withstand the onslaught? The key was that the U.S. had deciphered the Japanese Navy's code and gained advanced knowledge of their action plans. The US military used this intelligence advantage to set a strategic trap near Midway Island. On June 4, 1942, the battle began. With their concealed deployment, the US carrier fleet successfully evaded the Japanese preemptive strike. Instead, it was the Japanese Navy that suffered heavy losses after continuous surprise attacks by US aircraft. In just 3 days, the Japanese lost 4 large aircraft carriers and hundreds of planes. The Battle of Midway completely reversed the situation in the Pacific. The Japanese Navy could never recover from this point on and shifted from offense to defense. The US military seized the opportunity and began the counterattack strategy of island hopping, closing in on the Japanese mainland step by step. In a sense, it was the Battle of Midway that determined the final outcome of the Pacific War. It was not only a military turning point, but also a symbol that justice would ultimately triumph over evil. US Navy Admiral Nimitz once commented, "The Battle of Midway changed everything. After that, we marched forward triumphantly." In 1945, despite the Axis powers being defeated one after another, the stubborn Japanese militarists still refused to surrender. To end the war as soon as possible, the United States made a highly controversial decision: to drop atomic bombs on Japan. On August 6th, an atomic bomb named Little Boy exploded over Hiroshima. 3 days later, the Fat Man atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. In just a few seconds, the two cities were reduced to ashes, and hundreds of thousands of civilians perished. The mushroom clouds released by the atomic bombs were like tombstones of human civilization. In the ruins, the plight of the survivors was heart-wrenching. Some had their skin burned, some suffered from radiation, some lost all their loved ones. It was a living hell. The trauma brought to Japan and the entire world by the atomic bombings went far beyond this. It changed the nature of warfare and ushered in an era of nuclear deterrence. After the war, the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, began a long Cold War and nuclear arms race. For the first time, humanity had the ability to destroy itself. The tragedies of Hiroshima and Nagasaki became the sword of Damocles, hanging over all of humanity. The atomic bomb may be the terminator of war, but it should never be the beginning of peace. Only by remembering history and adhering to peaceful development can humanity avoid repeating the same mistakes and move towards a bright future. When the smoke cleared, World War II finally ended. However, the post-war world did not usher in the dawn of peace. Instead, it was replaced by decades of Cold War confrontation between the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Driven by both ideology and geopolitics, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in all-round rivalry. From space to the deep sea, from the arms race to proxy wars, the confrontation between the two camps extended to every corner of the world. The establishment of the Berlin Wall became a symbol of the Cold War pattern. The end of World War II also marked the starting point of the collapse of the colonial system. The vast colonies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America strived for national independence, setting off an inspiring historical wave. From India's independence to Africa's awakening, one emerging country after another embarked on the path of self-development. Under the shadow of war trauma and nuclear threat, the international community called for guarantees of peace and stability. In 1945, the United Nations was born. Its establishment marked the establishment of a new international order and provided a platform for dialogue and cooperation in the post-war world. World War II changed the world political landscape, but the issues left behind remained daunting. How to seek coexistence in confrontation, seek cooperation in differences, and transform the shadows of war into the driving force for peace. This is the epical proposition that the post-war world pattern has left us with.